stop it from doing that thing with the lobby, you can go to your meeting settings and allow everyone into your room.
Oh, that is very good to know. Thank you. Let me just do that before I start my presentation or to get the PowerPoint up. Great. I'm unfortunately not able to see that setting, so I'll explore that option for the future. I appreciate that tip, though.
If you
But
if you go to the more, the 3 dots on the more,
mhm.
it'll have your meeting information. And if you set up the meeting, you should be able to change the setting to everyone can be in the meeting. Does that work?
Got it. I see that. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so now folks should just be able to join without us having to admit them. Great. That's a great tip. Thank you for that. Oh. All right. So let me just get this up and running. So first of all, just want to say welcome everybody. This is the applicant webinar for the FY22 on-farm trials competition. My name is Leah Hermans. I am the program manager for on-farm trials. And what we're going to do today is we're going to start with an overview of the program and this year's competition, which should take about half an hour, which will leave us a good amount of time for a Q&A at the end of the session. I can't see the questions coming in, so we're just going to take them all at the end. And just feel free to enter your questions into the chat box, and my colleagues will help to facilitate the Q&A. The meeting is recorded, and we are going to be posting a copy of the recording and the slides to the SIG website after the presentation. So it can sometimes take a few days to a week or so to get up there, though. And just really want to start by saying thank you for your interest in the program. The quality of this program is really based on, it's built off of the quality of our applicants and the projects that we get in. So we really appreciate you all taking the time today to learn more about the program. And for those of you who feel you're the appropriate applicants, we're eager to see your proposals, and yeah, just thanks for your interest in learning more about on-farm trials. So I want to just start with some background on the program. On-farm trials was first authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill. So this is our 4th competition. It's a component of the Conservation Innovation Grants, which is itself part of the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, referred to as EQIP. And the on-farm trials competition includes the soil health demo trial priority, which is a subcomponent for projects that strictly relate to the implementation of soil health practices and systems. And our soil health demo projects require some unique responsibilities on the part of the grantees, but I'm going to get into those details later in the presentation. So I always think it's helpful up front to make some distinctions between SIG Classic, which is the program as it existed since its initiation in 2004, and the on-farm trials program that we're going to be talking about in detail today. So to start, SIG Classic funds the development and piloting of new approaches and technologies. So the key here is it's really more for early stage exploration. And there's not necessarily a guarantee that projects are going to be successful. So in cases where more field tests should be done before the practice is scaled up, that's where SIG Classic is going to be a better fit for your project. For on-farm trials, we fund the adoption and evaluation of innovative technologies that have a known benefit, which is really the key there, that known conservation benefit, and that they're ready to be scaled up. There's also some clear structural components that on-farm trials projects need to have that SIG Classic doesn't have that same rigidity around how projects need to be formed. So all on-farm trials projects are really built around providing technical assistance and incentives to producers to get them to adopt a practice or practices, and then evaluating the impacts of those trials. One thing to note here too is that SIG on-farm trials is really not intended, nor is it structured to be appropriate for single site demonstrations. SIG Classic has in the past funded some single site demonstrations and could potentially, but it's really, there's really not a place in on-farm trials for those single site demonstrations. We really need to have, we're looking to scale up the practice, and one producer doing a demo doesn't really fit the bill. Also, that evaluation piece is just no room to have a robust evaluation with only one site. So here we have a snapshot of last year's competition and the breakdown of the applicants we received. So of the 53 proposals that passed the initial vetting, we ended up funding 18 projects for a total of exactly $25 million. And you can see the breakdown by priority category as well here. As in most years, as in previous years, the soil health demo trial received the most amount of applicants and also the most amount of awards. That has been typical just because we have that 10%, up to 10%, or sorry, $10 million specifically for the soil health demo trials. The other priorities do fluctuate, and I expect they will continue to fluctuate year to year. Okay, here we have the application essentials that you'll need to know in order to get started. The first place to start for anyone interested in the program is to read the notice of funding opportunity. This can be found on grants.gov just using a simple search or by looking up the opportunity number listed here. I went in this morning, and if you type into the keyword search conservation and innovation, it is the first hit that pops up. So the notice of funding opportunity, which is posted there, has all the key information you'll need to know on what we're looking to fund, on kind of what the rules of the game are, and what you'll need to apply. And it's where you will submit your application itself. So if you haven't read through the NFL already, that is the starting point before taking any other steps. One change from last year is that we are accepting proposals through grants.gov as opposed to the programs portal. So all applications must be submitted through grants.gov. The NFO has details on what you'll need to submit your application there. And if you have any questions about kind of the technical steps of the submission process or technical issues with grants.gov, please contact the grants.gov application support, which is listed both here in the slide and in the notice of funding opportunity and on grants.gov. My team can't help with the technical aspects of submitting through grants.gov. So we'll be pointing you there if you come to us with questions about creating an account or the logistics of actually submitting the proposal through that platform.
So Leah, we have lost your screen.
Oh.
So yeah, so if you could just get that up again. I'm not sure what happened.
Thank you for pointing that out. Let me try this one more time. All right, are you able to see my screen again? It looks like it's just in the process of coming up now.
We can. It's not in like the view. Okay, now you're about to put it in the view. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, please let me know if that happens again. All right, are you still able to see it now that it's back in presenter mode?
Yes, we can see it now.
Perfect,
And
thank you.
Just to remind everyone really quickly that we won't be taking verbal questions, to put your questions in the chat.
Great, thanks, Caroline. I appreciate that reminder. Okay, so I was just noting that all proposals need to be submitted through grants.gov. And then up here we have the applicant support phone number and email for grants.gov if you have any technical issues with submitting or questions about submitting your proposal. Couple other things that are worth noting. The government has replaced the DUNS number with a UEI, which is the unique entity identifier. So it's worth calling out that you'll need to be registered in SAM before submitting the application, and you'll have to provide that number as part of the application. That registration can take several weeks, so plan ahead accordingly. That's something you'll want to get started on early. And then, as noted in the posting, and the NFO proposals are due on September 22nd, but we strongly encourage folks to get in there and submit the application package at least 24 hours, preferably at more than 48 hours before the close date. You know, every year we get emails and voicemails that come in at 11:30 p.m. on the date of the closing, and it's always heartbreaking because we know you've put a lot of time into your proposals, and we very much want to read them, and hate to see a proposal not get reviewed because of a technical issue or a glitch with the submission. So please, as a best practice, folks, get in there and submit your proposals before the due date, at least 24 to 40 hours before. So let's talk a little bit about funding. This year we have another $25 million that has been made available, at least 10 million of which will go to the soil health demo priority. Just like last year, we have a maximum award size of $5 million, a minimum award size of $2,500, sorry, $250. Oh man, my numeralexia is flaring up right now. $250,000 is the minimum award size, and then projects can last from 3 to 5 years in duration. New this year is we are setting aside at least 10% of on-farm trials funding for projects that benefit historically underserved producers. And so to qualify for this, what we call HU set aside, applicants must be one of the following. So they have to be either a community-based organization comprised of representing or exclusively working with HU producers for the life of the project, or an entity developing an innovative conservation approach or technology specifically targeting the unique needs and limitations of HU producers for the life of the project, or an 1890 or 1994 land grant institution, Hispanic serving institution, or other minority serving institution. And you must signal your intent to apply for the set aside by following the instructions in the NFO, which, just to call them out right here, you're going to need to state that you're competing for this set aside on the cover page, and then also note which of these 3 categories applies to you as an applicant. And we'll go into detail about match later, but it's worth noting that the match requirement is reduced from 25% of the federal funds to 10%. For folks who qualify for the HU set aside. So here are our priorities for this year. Irrigation management, climate smart agriculture, and soil health demo trials have broadly remained the same from last year, but however, there have been some changes made within each priority. We did add nutrient management as a new priority this year, and this replaced the management strategies and technologies priority from last year. Applicants must choose one priority category for their proposal. We sometimes get folks, asking, is it a benefit to cover more than one priority? And the answer is no, not necessarily. Really, you choose one primary priority under which your proposal, your project fits, and that will determine the panel, which will review your project, looking at it through the lens of that priority. So we encourage folks to read those priorities carefully and consider which priority your project best fits under. This is not something we can advise on. In general, we're not allowed to advise on proposal development. So just please take a look at those priorities carefully. And if your project happens to touch on more than one, choose the one that's the best fit, the single one that's the best fit for your project. Right, now I want to just take a minute to talk more about the soil health demo trial priority specifically, because as I mentioned before, there are some unique things that are specific to this priority. At least $10 million of the total on-farm trials funding is intended for projects under this priority. And the goal of it is to support more widespread adoption of soil health management systems and practices. I'd say the biggest extra piece here is related to evaluation protocol. We work with our awardees to use consistent evaluation protocol and method for assessing soil carbon changes and other soil health outcomes, including economic outcomes. So there's a robust evaluation piece that's standardized for soil health demo trials. Other priorities do have an evaluation requirement, but it's not as prescriptive as the soil health demo trials. It's one last thing I'll note about soil health demo priority is that any producer who participates in it will need to consent to NRCS using data collected for a congressionally mandated report. All right, so I touched on this earlier, but there are really three big pieces to each on-farm trials project. The first is that incentive payments are made to producers by the grantee. We expect financial assistance in the form of incentive payments to come directly from the grantee or the partners to the producers. And then the grantee also provides the technical assistance to producers to assist with implementing the innovative practice. There are some circumstances under which NRCS can assist with TA if requested as part of the proposal, but we give priority consideration to proposals where the technical assistance is provided entirely by either the awardee or a partner. And lastly, there's the evaluation component where the grantee will assess the natural resource and economic and to the extent possible social outcomes of the on-farm trials. Applicants must have the capacity to do this evaluation piece or partner with somebody who does. And so we look to the lead applicant to work with partners to complete all of these pieces, and they'll be responsible for coordinating all three of these elements. It's worth noting here that the statute allows NRCS to implement on-farm trials in one of two ways. So either ourselves with input from the private sector or through partners, which are eligible entities, applicants. And we are going with the latter for 2020 again. We really look for partners who can help the agency identify the most promising innovations and approaches, and most of the work and activities will be carried out by our awardees. So we're looking for partners who can step up, that have access to the producer networks, and that can find participating producers that can handle, the technical assistance, getting the activities on the ground, and then help evaluate and understand how successful these conservation activities are. All right, now I'm going to just do kind of a flyover of the typical events in an on-farm trials project. So as I noted, we'll have the proposals submitted by September 22nd, and then we expect to make an award announcement sometime in December, and roughly anticipate that projects will begin in April of 2023. These dates are estimates and they can be moving targets. So while we in our NFO have our awardees put April 1st as an anticipated start date, we just want you to understand that there may need to be some flexibility around that date. It could be March 20th, it could be April 20th. These numbers, these dates can be moving targets and often are. So whether it's a little bit before or a little after, we just need you to know that there's some flexibility around that date. So to kick off the projects, we hold a new awardee orientation, and the awardees also consult with their assigned NRCS technical contact as part of that. And then the first big step is to have the partners identify, once the project begins, is to have partners identify producers. Some partners will already have the producers selected up front. So a frequent question that we get is if producers need to be identified in the proposal. They do not, but applicants must clearly describe their plan to recruit producers and what producers they're targeting. So for example, how many, where, your strategy for historically underserved recruitment. And then either way, whether you have producers identified up front or select them at the beginning of your project. Once the agreements are finalized and producers are selected, the awardees will work with NRCS to confirm the producer eligibility, and we'll talk about the details of that in just a minute. And also to complete the environmental evaluations for their project sites. And this, in terms of timing, the timelines, this is also something I want to flag because environmental evaluations can take several weeks to several months to complete once the producers and sites have been selected. And no ground disturbing activities can take place until they are done. So when we say kind of an estimated start date of April 1st, please do not plan on having shovels in the ground on April 10th. That's just likely not going to be very realistic given the timeline for these environmental evaluations and given the fact that the actual start date may fluctuate a bit around that early April estimate. Once we have the site selected and we've confirmed producer eligibility and environmental compliance, that's when the real work actually gets started, and partners will make those incentive payments to participating producers. That's when they'll provide the technical assistance to implement the trials. And over time, they'll evaluate the conservation benefits and to the extent possible, the economic and social as an optional benefits of the trials. And then throughout the project, awardees do the project admin, which includes submitting semi-annual progress reports, annual financial reports, and then ultimately a final progress report along with payment request and those things. All right, so let's talk about eligible entities or eligible applicants. There are really three broad categories of eligible entities that are outlined in the statute. The first one is private entities whose primary business is related to agriculture. The second being nonprofits with experience working with agricultural producers. And then the third is non-federal government agencies. So, for example, public universities often fall under non-federal government agencies. Private universities can apply as nonprofits with experience working with ag producers. And then, small or large businesses would fit as private entities if their primary business is related to agriculture. Really, the one group that is clearly not eligible to apply would be individuals. Individuals are not eligible applicants. And this year, we've already gotten just a handful of inquiries from producers asking if they are eligible to apply or asking questions about applying for on-farm trials. Producers as individuals, as their individuals, are not eligible to apply. A farm business, in theory, could apply, but this really gets into the intent of on-farm trials and the logistics of it. On-farm trials is set up to best serve producers as participants of a project and not as the lead of a project. Our leads just need to have the capacity to, do everything that we've been talking about or that I've mentioned before in terms of producer recruitment, in terms of making the incentive payments, providing the technical assistance, doing the evaluation component, and all of the grants admin. So that's not a side gig. That it really requires the experience and capacity working in federal grants to be able to manage an award of this size. Like I said, individual producers or folks looking to do things on their own site are really best served as participants of an on-farm trials project, often not appropriate as the lead of an on-farm trials project. But talking about producers' involvement in projects, there are a few considerations in terms of producer eligibility. So one, producers must be EQIP eligible, including that they are in compliance with the highly erodible land and wetland compliance, wetland conservation provisions. In addition, they must meet the adjusted gross income requirements of the Farm Bill. And this AGI requirement, we can request waivers, or folks can request waivers for land that is of special environmental significance. Just be aware that this is not something that is often granted. You know, it really it only applies to land of special environmental significance and practices that are addressing the issues that put them into that category. So we have not yet seen a waiver be granted for that. I'm not saying it's not possible, it totally is, but there are just very, very specific circumstances under which a waiver would be granted. And so your product is going to be very vulnerable if you're working with folks that don't meet that AGI requirement. So just in general, our awardees will work with the NRCS staff to ensure that the producers receiving on-farm trials incentives meet these eligibility requirements before any payments are made, or before any financial benefits are given to these producers. And one thing to note is that incentive payments received from an on-farm trials grant don't count towards the producer's EQIP payment limitation. And NRCS will work with the awardees to complete the producer eligibility checks. So there should be no additional costs associated with it in terms of your project budget. All right, so this line just outlines in broad strokes the expected NRCS involvement in a project. So as I just mentioned, the environmental evaluations, the producer eligibility checks are run by the NRCS staff, and then just general technical oversight is provided by an NRCS technical contact, but really the lead partner is responsible for coordinating with NRCS to get all these done. So while we do the environmental evaluations and we will look at the producer eligibility checks, there is an amount of coordination between the producers and NRCS to facilitate that. Okay, so now we're going to get to talk about matching funds. This program does have a match requirement. That is a minimum of 25% of the federal share of the agreement is required in partner match. This requirement is reduced to 10% for applicants who apply for and qualify for the HU set aside. And it can be waived entirely, as noted in the NFO, for applicants that qualify for the HU set aside and provide a justification for why they're unable to provide the matching funds. In general, our peer panels will evaluate the magnitude and significance of match as part of the project evaluation criteria. All right, just a couple additional key points before we get to the Q&A. So no on-farm trials funding can be used to pay for partner admin cost. So indirect cost cannot be included in the federal portion of the budget, but they can be used as match. While indirect costs are not allowed in the federal portion of the budget, direct expenses are. So, you know, things like filling out required reports or organizing partner meetings are allowable costs. All right, so with that, we'll move to the question and answer portion of this webinar. Again, please feel free to type your question into the chat box. We'll try to answer as many as possible today, but for those that don't get answered, we'll add to a frequently asked question document that will be posted to our website. If your question is specific to your project or not appropriate for a general audience, please feel free to email those to the email address here on the screen, which is nrcscig@usda.gov. It's also the contact posted in the notice of funding opportunity. Just one last thing to note, though, is that this is a competitive funding opportunity, so we can't advise applicants on putting together their proposal. We also can't comment on the merit of your proposal. So we're really able to answer questions, any clarifying questions from the information provided in the notice of funding opportunity. All right, so with that, I will open things up
really
for the
quickly,
Q&A.
one of the awardees wanted to see slide 4.
Oh, okay, sounds great. Yeah, let me.
But, I can
pull
start
that back
reading
up.
the questions though. I thought this was a good one. In the eligibility portion of the NFO, it says for-profit entities are eligible for on-farm trials if their primary business is related to agriculture. We're a renewable energy for-profit company. We do work with farmers, but are we still ineligible based on this criteria? You want me to restate it?
Yeah, if you could, please.
This group is a renewable energy for-profit company that does work with farmers. So are they eligible or not given the criteria?
So yeah, it's private, so that it would be a private entity. That's where it's private entities whose primary business is related to agriculture. And so we would have to allow we don't make that determination. We have to allow as you apply, you'd have to consider is your primary business related to agriculture?
So they would answer it. Okay, next question. Do the conservation practices need to be directly tied to an existing USDA NRCS EQIP conservation practice, or can it be something new that is not currently an EQIP practice?
It can be something new that is not currently an EQIP practice. For the sake of the environmental evaluations, though, that's just something to consider because our environmental evaluations are based off of our awardees either using standard NRCS conservation practices or having some, I can't remember the exact terminology, but having some limitation in scope and intensity. So if you're using a new practice that is not limited in scope and intensity, it just may require a much longer environmental evaluation process and potentially an environmental assessment, which needs to be paid for by the awardee. So if you're really looking something outside of the scope of NRCS practice, it's not limited in context or intensity, it might be worth considering just the cost of the environmental assessment that would go along with it.
In the NFO on page 24, it mentions budgeting $6,000 for project travel dictated by NRCS, and later it says $3,000. What's the correct amount?
It's $6,000. I recently caught that discrepancy and we'll get it corrected. The correct amount is $6,000. Thanks for that question.
On the USDA website, it says for this grant, at least 10% of the total funds available for on-farm trials are set aside for proposals that entirely benefit historically underserved producers. Additionally, applicants competing for the HU set-aside can waive non-federal match requirements. Does this mean all non-federal funds for matching may be waived?
I'm not sure I understand that question. So it just means there's no match requirement. So for those who qualify as one of the 3 groups listed for the HU set aside, or one of the 3 qualifiers listed for the HU set aside, it just means there's no match requirement for that group. Sorry, Caroline, did I miss a nuance in that question?
No, I think that's correct. I think they wanted to know, I mean, but basically for any project that is not applying to the set aside, they have a match requirement.
Correct, yes.
Right,
So
and that-
any project that does not qualify for the HU set aside or is not applying for the HU set aside, it needs to meet that match requirement, which is 25% of the federal funds requested.
And we had another question to just review match again in general. So for regular projects, what would, can you go through the match?
Pull up that slide as well, so folks can. Matching funds. So just to review there's a minimum of 25% of the federal share of the agreement. So of the federal funds requested that needs to be proposed and given as matching funds, as partner match. And that can be in kind, that can be cash, that can be directly from the primary applicant, or it can be from partners.
On page 9 of the NFO, under D, soil health demonstration trials, it states all soil health demonstration proposals should include baseline data, controls, standard assessment methods. Are these parameters referring to case studies already performed, or are they referring to future on-farm trials?
Future on-farm trials, if I understand the question correctly.
Do references count towards the project narrative page limit?
They do. That's something we changed this year as they are, since we went from the portal, a programs portal, accepting applications through there as that platform, to accepting them through grants.gov. The project narrative, we expanded the page limit to account for this from what was previously 15 pages to 18 pages, and references need to be included in that. And please pay attention, in the NFO, there's a list of order of what needs to be in that project narrative, and keep the project narrative components in that order, because that's when our folks going in to vet these proposals go in to look at them, and when the peer review panels go in to review them, they're looking for things in a certain order. So as it says in the NFO, please keep that project narrative in the order requested.
This is related to agriculture. Does this include agricultural vendors and service providers?
Is that if the question is related to eligibility? Yeah, again, it goes back to private. If you're a private entity whose primary business is related to agriculture, you are an eligible applicant. We get a lot of questions through our inbox about, whether a co-op can apply, whether a conservation district can apply, and it really, our eligible entities are more broad than they may seem. It's private entities, nonprofits, or non-federal government agencies. It's really just looking at whether or not your business is related to agriculture, whether you have experience working with agricultural producers. And then the groups that are clearly not eligible are individuals. And then also, we've got our federal government agencies are obviously not allowed to apply for awards either.
Okay. If I'm a farmer, how do I find awardees in my area so I can get resources to implement practices on my farm?
So when we make our announcement, the announcement goes to our website. It's publicly announced who is going to be receiving an award, and so you can see there what state they're working in, and that's when we would welcome producers. And you can also see the description of their project. We would welcome producers to reach out to the awardees to see if they might be a good fit for the project. But NRCS doesn't facilitate producer recruitment. That's really on the side of the awardees. So if an eligible producer saw project that was taking place in their area that they would be interested in. You're welcome just to reach out directly to the awardee.
Okay. A little more AGI information. Please provide an example.
So off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly what the AGI limit is. Caroline, do you happen to know?
I think it's $900,000.
That sounds right. So the AGI requirement will, there'll be a link to that in the NFO. And what it just means is that producers who are going to be participating and receiving any financial benefit from the project need to be under that AGI requirement in order to participate. That vetting is done. Yeah, I'm seeing confirmation from my colleague that 900,000 is correct. So that vetting is done after the producers are selected, but we just bring it up now just so folks know that that's part of producer eligibility, because it is. And then also, if it's something to be aware of, that if you plan on working with producers that have over that AGI, that 900,000 limit, there is the potential to request a waiver, but it's only for the lands of special environmental significance. So that's really not a waiver that is given out freely. Projects, unless they happen to be targeting land of special environmental significance, need to work with producers that are under that AGI limit.
Right, and it doesn't refer to the grantee, just to accentuate.
Oh, correct. Yes, sorry if I didn't catch that. That's correct. It's
yeah.
not the awardee themselves. It's the producers that they are going to be recruiting to work with them as part of their trials.
Unless the awardee is using their own farm. Right? I think that's correct.
Correct. Yeah, and there's no
division.
explicit prohibition of an awardee using their own farm, but that is very kind of counterintuitive to the nature of the program. Just because, the awardee is supposed to be incentivizing producers to try new things that they otherwise wouldn't be, and providing technical assistance and the financial incentives. But if the awardee themselves already kind of knows how to do this, and it's something they're developing or working on, it just wouldn't be an ideal participant in an on-farm trials project. So it's not something we've seen before. It's not something that on-farm trials is built for.
So can you confirm if the NFO specified narrative section titled Assessment of Environmental Impact is referring to the preliminary environmental evaluations that are required in collaboration with NRCS to begin the proposed on-farm implementations as described on this webinar?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. So there's no interaction with NRCS in terms of putting together that section of your proposal. That proposal is really just describing, and I don't have the words in front of me, but it's as it describes in the NFO, it's really just the applicant describing the expected environmental impacts. But that is not the environmental evaluation, and it is not the environmental assessment. Those parts tend to be, I'd say, half a page or so in length, and if not less, and it's really just a description of the expected environmental impacts from the awardee's perspective.
So one producer doesn't fit the bill as the lead, but what if it's one producer with two different farm spaces and elevations? Can you clarify and speak to single site demonstrations? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, one producer with two. So in general, our on-farm trials project, so we are looking at really scaling up the adoption. And so we don't, single site demonstrations are not appropriate. Are two sites appropriate? We haven't seen it before. I technically it's more than one, but would it be competitive in terms of having a robust evaluation? I have to learn more, but we'd have to put it through the panel to learn. But in general, our on-farm trials awardees tend to work with yeah, I think we've had as low as 5 sites in the past to as many as, well over 100. So it is one of those cases of the more the better. We're not looking at just implementing these demonstration sites and very limited context, but it's going to be based upon the complexity and the price of the practice that's being implemented. So I don't know enough to comment on this individual situation. I never want to say never, but it's the intent is to have one of our partners work with multiple producers to really scale up these practices.
Can this grant be used to purchase equipment?
Yes, it can. There are, some considerations if you purchase equipment. At the end, you have to go through the appropriate equipment disposition that would be outlined in the terms and conditions of your agreement. But it can and has been used to purchase equipment. And obviously, that equipment needs to be necessary for the project.
Do we need to include budget for environmental evaluations? Is there an evaluation needed if the producer is already EQIP eligible?
Yeah, there is, because there are 2 different parts of that. One is the environmental evaluation, and one is the producer eligibility check. The producer eligibility check will require absolutely no funding under any circumstances that I've seen or that I could think of, because that's really just the producers going to their local FSA office, getting registered. As part of that registration, the FSA office checks for the EQIP eligibility points. And then somebody, once the producer comes to the awardee and says, yes, I've registered with the FSA and I am eligible, somebody from NRCS will do a check on the back end, confirm with the awardee that they are clear to go. So there are really no cost associated with that process. The environmental evaluations are separate, and that is looking at the site and the potential environmental impacts, and also depending on the situation, sometimes the cultural impacts of implementing the trial on that site. But so far, we have not had an awardee need to do an environmental assessment. But this is also a relatively new program, so it's one of those never say never type things, because it could very well happen. Most projects that use NRCS practices, well, all projects that use NRCS standard practices, and then most projects, we're looking at things that are intended to have positive environmental benefits. So if they're limited in scope and intensity, and somebody from the NRCS side who is going to be reviewing this can reasonably say that there are not any expected negative environmental consequences, those types of projects, which are all we've had so far, can be completed with environmental evaluation and do not require any additional funding on the part of the grantee for an environmental assessment. It's really the kind of what we don't know, folks that are doing something that's extremely new, that's completely outside of NRCS standards, not just an adjustment on them, but something very new that could potentially have a negative environmental impact. That is where an environmental assessment might be required. And that is where funding might be required for that portion.
So if you're HU, can you apply for the 10% instead of the 25% match without applying for the specific HU set aside?
No, you need to qualify. The application for the HU set aside is really just signaling that you meet one of those 3 groups. So we would need to know that you meet one of those 3 groups to know that you're eligible to be waived for that. If we just get a normal applicant that doesn't meet match, we wouldn't know that person didn't meet match because they were HU unless they call that out specifically in their application, which is going through, it's applying for the HU set aside is, nothing more than adding that line and that description in the cover letter or the cover page, and then also having that description in the HU narrative. But the 10% set aside, we're really just saying that we're saving at least 10% of funds for projects that meet those requirements. It could very well be more. It's not that HU the HU set aside is a pool that's competed amongst itself, and then the rest of the applicants are all the applicants are competed together. But the HU set aside is we're just reserving funds for folks who meet these qualifications, and then there's the additional benefit of having the reduced matching funds. I hope that makes sense. I know that might have been a little long-winded answer to that.
Is there a maximum amount that can be dedicated to incentive payments in the budget proposal?
There is not a maximum amount, nor is there a minimum. We really, it's up to the awardees to set the incentives and, balance that out with the other costs, the costs that are going to go into technical assistance, the costs that are going to go into the evaluation, and then the costs that are associated with, having the program staff and all the other grants administration in terms of, building your budget, the staff and the fringe and all that fun stuff.
Okay. I work for a land grant university. Am I eligible to apply? That's a yes. Right?
Yeah, there's that really falls back in that the land grant university, if it's universities in general tend to fall under, public universities fall under that non-federal government agency category. And then private universities often apply as nonprofits if they have experience working with ag producers.
Can grant funds be used towards structures?
If you mean buildings and facilities, if that's part of the question, no, I think that's one of the structures. I think I might need more information in terms of what structures. But one of the things that's explicitly called out in the NFO as an unallowable cost is we're not allowed to pay for facility costs. So we can't pay for the building of the constructions of buildings. But I'm not sure if there's something else intended by structures.
Can a community-based organization with non-HU farmers on another project work with only HU farmers on the SIG project and qualify for the HU set aside? I think if they're working with 100% HU farmers, they can, right? Because
for the project itself. So you're if you're a nonprofit or a group that has several projects, the SIG or the on-farm trials project, if you're going to be applying for the set aside, needs to be working with 100% HU participants for the life of the project within the project.
so we're going to provide the PowerPoint. We can make that available, right?
Correct. Yes. And I'm just noticing we are at the top of the hour. So Caroline, I think we might have time for another 3 or 4 questions.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
And then any questions that don't get answered, we will put into the FAQ document. If they're appropriate for a general audience, or we also have that NRCS CIG inbox. So we welcome you to send your questions directly to that.
Okay, this person asked this question again. Do you have to choose one of the 4 priorities, or can you do a project that addresses 2? And I know you covered that, but
yeah, that's a good question. It's worth covering again, though. So you have to choose one priority. So one priority under which your proposal is going to be competed. That dictates the panel that will be reviewing your proposal.
Is this on-farm funding grant more geared towards entities that have already performed large-scale trials? And SIG Classic grant funding are for entities trying to begin large-scale trials?
The entity itself doesn't necessarily have to have performed the trials beforehand of the practice for on-farm trials. But for on-farm trials, the projects are geared towards practices that have already had the trials done around them. Whereas correct for SIG Classic, a project that has not yet gone through the trial process might be more appropriate. It might be appropriate for SIG Classic.
To meet the 25% match requirement, can the applicant use the retail price of its technology it will be providing in the farm trial? That would be yes, like as a rental cost, right, Leah?
Interesting. Yeah. So like as an equipment cost or as a supply cost?
I think
Yes.
they can put it in like a rental cost, sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
or supply, yeah, supply cost.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Are there examples of projects that have been funded in the past that we can read? It's a good one for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. We're actually in the process of transitioning to a new website, or updating our website. We don't have a specific date set for that, but I anticipate it will be done within the next couple of weeks. On our current website, we do have a search tool that you can search through previously funded SIG projects. It just unfortunately doesn't have projects from recent years in there. But the new website, which folks will be automatically redirected to once it's up, so that once you go to our website, within the next couple of weeks, you're going to see a different layout, and we're going to have a search tool as project search tool as part of that, where folks can go in and get a lot more information on all the projects that have been funded, including recent on-farm trials projects. But if you're looking for a brief description of the projects that were funded last year, please email the inbox and I can get you a link to the announcement that went out last year. It's something you can find on the web, but so if you don't want to kind of do the Google search and go looking for it, I can get you that direct link to the projects that were funded last year. And it's just a brief description, but more will be coming once that search tool is available.
So do you want to keep going with questions? We're at the hour.
We're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to close this out now. But again, really just want to say a huge thanks to everybody for taking the time to learn more about the program and ask the questions. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of them. I know we usually can't, but that's where we'll have that frequently asked questions document coming up very soon. And then that NRCS CIG at USDA.gov is your best bet for asking any applicant questions. And so we'll be happy to answer your questions offline there. So with that, Caroline, thanks for facilitating the Q&A. And again, a huge thank you to all the folks who joined today. We very much look forward to reviewing your proposals. So thanks, best of luck, and we look forward to learning more about your projects during the proposal review.